Yes. Yes, it's that time again. BretFlix top 5 video. Now we're doing the 80s. Almost done with our decades, got a few more to go. And real quick, just let me talk about the 80s for a second. The 80s is probably the most loved decade, at least of recent years. I mean, a lot of them were kind of forgotten. Anything from like the 1800s, no one's just like, oh man, dude, the 1880s would have been so cool, or the 1870s was so cool. No, there's nothing really like that. There's a lot of romanticism about the 80s. There's a lot of romanticism about every decade, but it just seems like the 80s is the most nostalgic of them all. Even for those who didn't live through the 80s, like myself, I was born in '93, so I never saw the 80s, and I'll never know what it was like to see the 80s. All I'll see are like remnants of the 80s, things that came from that decade, the music and the movies. And the television shows, stuff like that, like the art. Art is what's really going to survive from the time, and that'll give you kind of a sense of what that time was like. And it's funny with the 80s. There's also kind of an interesting phenomenon I've noticed, is that a lot of the favorite movies of the 80s aren't really like all that good. I mean, I don't want to diss on some of these movies, but like, everyone's just like, oh, dude, Breakfast Club was the best thing of all time in the 80s, and 16 Candles and Top Gun and Pretty in Pink, that kind of stuff. It's like the Goonies. It's like really, those are the best movies of the 80s. I can think of a lot that I thought were a little bit better, but those are good movies. I enjoy those movies, but why are those the best things of all time? I never could quite understand that. Especially since some of those movies were about nostalgia. It seems like something like Breakfast Club is a movie like about nostalgia for a time that it was already that the movie was taking place in, and because even when people who didn't live through the 80s, like when they see that final image from the Breakfast Club and the guy puts his fists up in the air, like everyone goes like, yeah, the 80s was awesome. Everyone just kind of has that feeling, even I do. Yet it's like, wait, that movie came out in the 80s, and I don't know. The 80s to me just seems like it's a decade of nostalgia, and a lot of the things people have nostalgia for, I'm not really that big a fan of. I don't know, because my top 5 movies, even my honorable mentions, aren't anywhere close to something like 16 Candles. I don't know, call me weird, maybe I'm wrong, maybe those were the best movies of the decade, I'm not sure. Real quick, before I start my top 5 pick, I'll just give you some honorable mentions, movies I really wanted to talk about, but I can only pick 5. Movies, great films, some of my all-time favorites, movies like John Carpenter's The Thing, De Palma's Blow Up, This Is Spinal Tap, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Platoon, Scarface, Risky Business, The Last Temptation of Christ, even a really underrated movie, One from the Heart, a Francis Ford Coppola film. This was a hard movie. It was a hard decade to narrow down to 5 movies. So I guess now that I've gotten that quick little intro out of the way, let me give you my top 5 pick. Do the Right Thing, directed by Spike Lee, 1989. Yeah, I don't own this movie. I do own the rest of the movies on my top 5 list, which isn't really how I pick I don't just like pick the movies I own to have be my top 5. It's just kind of the way it works out sometimes. I do not own this movie, but Do the Right Thing. It is one of the single most important movies I think any person can watch. It's one of those movies where you're a better person having seen the film. It's a special category of movies. It's one of those that it was a movie that needed to be made, and it was made by the exact right person who knew how to make it. Spike Lee, the man's a genius. Do the Right Thing is a really poignant film. It's a really powerful movie. It's like, when you put it on, there's a lot of colorful characters in it, and there's some, it has a great soundtrack, and things are fun and stuff. But that's only while you're experiencing the movie. Like when you walk away from the movie, you realize that like what all that stuff was building to, the climax of burning down Saul's pizzeria, and just the incredible power that this movie has. And it really does point out that we are not far from racism. A lot of people believe that. A lot of people are like, oh, slavery ended however many years ago. People are like, oh, we have a black president, so racism is over. And even though this movie was made in the 80s, long before we ever had a black president, this movie is still incredibly relevant today, maybe even more relevant than it's ever been, because we have, because of all the riots and things going on. There's still a ton of racial tension, and this movie points that out, and it's an incredibly fair film too. It doesn't just say white people are racist. It points out that black people are also racist, but not just against whites, but I believe the Chinese people who shows their racism, and the hatreds that cops have towards everybody, and the Italians have towards everybody, and it's just all this stuff that's so deeply ingrained in us that in day-to-day kind of interactions we can suppress it, but that uncalled for hatred is still boiling deep inside of us for reasons I don't really understand. Like I like to consider myself, someone who's not a racist, but I guess maybe because of the culture I grew up in or something, maybe I do have a lot of preconceived things in my head about types of people or something, and it's something I want to work on, something I want to try to catch and notice if I see it come out of me, and fix that. And this movie is just pointing out that that's in everybody. That racism doesn't just date back to slavery. That is something far beyond that. Just because slavery is over does not mean racism is over. And even if somehow we miraculously figured out a way to end racial tension between two groups of people, there's still dozens of other groups of people that are having these issues too. That because at the end of the day, it just comes down to the simple fact that we're all people, we're all humans, and we all generally want the same thing: just to be happy, to be left alone, just to let us do our own thing. Of course, as long as it doesn't hurt other people, and that's ultimately what I feel people want. And just because sometimes your neighbor has a certain color skin or a certain belief or a certain religion, sometimes even a certain kind of car, amazingly enough, you just can't find peace for some reason. So do the right thing is incredibly important. I didn't actually talk a whole lot about the movie. I just kind of talked a lot about what the movie means, but that's what makes it such a great film. I guess a little bit I could say about the movie is, like I said, it has a lot of colorful characters, and it is a really entertaining movie, and it is even a comical movie. But it's making some of the most serious statements of any film of all time. It's really, really well made, and it has a lot of Spike Lee's signature things. And this was an early film in his filmography, and it just showed that this guy was just going to go on to be a powerhouse filmmaker. This was like his third or fourth movie, I believe, within the span of a few years. Before this, I think was She's Gotta Have It and School Days, maybe something else, and then Do the Right Thing, like one of the great American films of all time. Just that someone that young and that inexperienced could turn a movie out like this, and not only just like peak here, but continue to make great films. Malcolm X is an incredibly powerful movie, incredibly ambitious movie. He Got Game is really great. Jungle Fever is really great. And even his lesser known movies and his lesser films, I think there's even a lot of greatness in a film like Bamboozled. But anyway, I'm gonna try to move on. Do the Right Thing is one of my favorite movies of all time, and kind of a great way to end the 80s too. Was one of the best movies ever. So my number 5 pick is Do the Right Thing from Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing from 1989. Fanny and Alexander, directed by Ingmar Bergman, 1982. Fanny and Alexander from 1982, one of Ingmar Bergman's reigning achievements, one of his many. and there's two versions of this movie. The one version I'm specifically talking about is the television version. This was a film he shot for TV in parts, and I think like 5 different parts, each part an hour to an hour and a half or so. Altogether, the television version is about 5 hours long. That's like his intended version. It was released in theaters, but because of the kind of painfully long length of the television version, they cut it down to about 3 hours, gave it an intermission, make it more bearable in the theater. I mean, 5 hours straight is pretty rough. 3 hours straight is pretty rough of just sitting there. But I actually haven't seen the theatrical cut yet. And I've owned this Blu-ray for like a couple of years. And I still haven't seen it yet, which is kind of a shame. But the TV cut is truly brilliant. And it is probably the accumulation of everything Bergman has ever done and whatever can go on to do. This was intended to be the last film like he'd ever make. I'm not totally sure why he was going to be done here, but I mean you can tell that he was trying to cram all of his fetishisms, all of his obsessions, all of his themes into one movie to kind of make the ultimate Bergman film, and he achieved that, I believe, because it has the discussions on God that's in every one of his movies. It has hints of magic. It has struggles between family and all that stuff, and it even has stuff about theater. That Bergman's a really big lover of theater, of live theater. It's kind of like Bergman's North by Northwest. When Hitchcock made North by Northwest, I don't know about Hitchcock himself, but I remember seeing an interview with the guy who wrote the film, who said, when he wrote North by Northwest, he wanted it to be the ultimate Hitchcock film. He wanted to take everything people know and love about Hitchcock, everything Hitchcock does in films, and put it into one movie, make it as epic as possible. This is kind of like his North by Northwest, it's a really great movie, very, very powerful. You walk away from it, having experienced one hell of a movie. I mean, and not just because of like its running time, but how much is in that running time. I mean, from the very beginning, I think it starts off on like a Christmas celebration, and you just have like, it's kind of like an Altman movie. There's just tons of characters you meet, and you have to try to keep track of them. They all get their own scenes, and they intermingle with each other and stuff. And it's just there's a lot going on in this movie. Like I said, it's 5 hours long, but it fills that time in with things, and it's hard. I can't imagine being that ambitious of a filmmaker to try to make a 5 hour long film. I mean, when I try to think of movie ideas, I'm like, man, can I even fit this into 70 minutes? Like this dude makes 5 hour long movie. Anyway, so Fanny and Alexander is my number 4 pick of my favorite film of the 80s. Comes from 1982. See this movie, whether it be the theatrical version or the TV version. I'm talking about the TV version, of course, and I'll get to the theatrical version someday. Raging Bull, directed by Martin Scorsese, 1980. Yes, the classic, very, very classic Raging Bull from 1980, I believe. Yes, 1980. I'm trying to think of a good place to start. I hate that I say that too many times when I do these videos, because I mean all these videos are unscripted, so it's like I don't really have a starting point, and sometimes there's just too much to say about a movie. I remember when I first saw Raging Bull. I was first being introduced to Martin Scorsese's movies, and I remember like the first Scorsese movie I saw where I was like aware that it was Scorsese was his film Who's That Knocking at My Door. And I'll kind of save that for a later discussion, but that is the movie that made me want to be a filmmaker. That was the first time I realized that it is the director that makes the film. And so from then on, I kind of developed this like obsession with Martin Scorsese, because I'm like, I want to see another one. I'd love to see another one of his films. Then you just any one of his movies, it's just like, wow, this guy's amazing. I mean, even in his lesser films, you take so much away from it, like just from a filmmaking aspect. And when I first saw Raging Bull, this was probably like my 5th or 6th movie of his. I was already obsessed. And I'm just thinking, like, dude, how can he make how can he beat what I've already seen? And this was just a colossal experience, you know, almost like not like a religious experience, but you know, it's like one of those. It's like, did Martin Scorsese know that at one point a guy named BretFlix would exist in the future, and he would need to see this movie? Because it was like one of those. It's like, this was a movie I needed to see. This was a movie that I'm like a better person having seen, you know. Real quick, it's about a boxer named Jake LaMotta, and he is an angry man, abusive in every way possible. So I don't know about drugs. He doesn't like abuse drugs or anything, but he's verbally abusive. He's physically abusive. At any moment, he can just up and beat the living crap out of somebody, whether it be his wife, whether it be his brother, and you know, and it was ultimately a movie about a man who's so insecure, and it's a movie about a man who's so incredibly paranoid. I mean, there's probably my favorite scene in the film is when his wife, played by Catherine Moriarty, who's great in this movie, makes a comment about how his like upcoming opponent is like a kind of a pretty boy, like a good looking dude. Like, she wasn't trying to say like, oh, I'm attracted to him. She was just kind of simply making the statement like, you know, it's almost like she's just trying to say like he's unexperienced. You can tell he hasn't been around a lot because his face is still pretty well put together, and she was just kind of making a passing observation. He's like, he's good looking. And she didn't mean anything by it, of course, but in Jake LaMotta's head, the way he turns that around, a way a lot of people in relationships turn statements like that around, means like, oh, you want to cheat on me? You think he's a bigger man than I am? Well, I'm going to show you. And then in the ring, he beats this dude's face in, and blood is gushing everywhere. His face is covered in blood. It nearly kills the guy. And he doesn't do it even to win the match. He does it, and then after he does it, he immediately looks over at his wife, at Catherine Moriarty, and goes, boom, I'm the bigger man than him, you know? And that kind of shows what this whole movie is truly about. It's just about a guy who he's kind of a sad man, and you sympathize not exactly with the things he does, but you kind of sympathize with the reasons why he does it, you know, because the things he does are terrible. You know, he should not. He beats people and all that stuff, and not just in the ring, but like in his social life, he beats people, beats his wife. Like, that's awful. That should never ever happen. But you know, you just kind of, but you just kind of almost see why he does it, and you don't forgive it. You know, I'm not trying to make excuses or anything. It's totally wrong. But you know, you just see this really just small man inside this big dude. Because like, I mean, in this movie, you know, De Niro's like, he's like ripped. Like, you would not want to take a punch from De Niro when he's in this kind of shape. So the title Raging Bull was a nickname that the real Jake LaMotta actually had, and it kind of goes to show what was actually going on inside of him. He was just deeply angry and stuff. And I don't mean to get too intimate with these videos and stuff, but like I said, like, this was a movie I felt like I needed to see, and I've already talked about, you know, about a man who's insecure and all this stuff, and I'm not trying to give too much insight on me or struggles I've gone through, but I just, you know, I mean, but it's like, that's just something we've all done. We've let our jealousy get the best of things, and we've let our jealousy ruin what was a good relationship. I've done that. I'm gonna admit that, you know, and seeing this movie was kind of a healing process for me on that one. Moving on from that point, I actually want to bring up a video I made a little while ago. It was sorry, I'm forgetting the title. It was Great Films I Don't Enjoy, and one of the films I talked about was Fight Club. And some of my opinions on that movie got a little bit of flack, got a little bit of disagreement, which is great. I love that kind of stuff. You know, that's the point of art. You know, that's why art is made, is to discuss and to disagree and to, you know, see how other people feel about things. And one of the points I made about Fight Club that I still believe is that Fight Club advocates violence, and I think that a movie like Raging Bull is a great like answer to that, you know, because I got some comments on that video saying like, oh, just because the movie shows a lot of violence doesn't mean it advocates it. And I'm not against movies showing a lot of violence. Raging Bull is an incredibly violent movie, and I'm a big fan of other movies that are incredibly violent. Obviously, I'm a Scorsese fan. He makes violent films. It's how the violence is used, and it is the point that the film is trying to make by showing the violence and using violence. In Fight Club, I feel like violence is shown as a good thing, and I feel like Fight Club is trying to make a point that, you know, we're a violent species, which that part I agree with, but we should like indulge in that, which that part I don't agree with. And this movie shows a character who is just as violent as any character in Fight Club, but it shows how that is wrong, you know, how he shouldn't be violent. That was my objections to Fight Club. You know, as Fight Club said, you should be violent. This movie says you shouldn't be, but they both show an incredible amount of violence. And I don't object to, I don't think anything when it comes to film or when it comes to art, period, is off limits, you know? I think it just depends on how, you know, the artists choose to handle the content that it's showing or discussing or whatever. Because I've seen things in movies, I mean, I've seen rape be portrayed in films, and you know, people being shot or people getting beat up, or even sex being used in films. And it's like, sure, all that can be superfluous and pointless, but the use of it in and of itself I don't object to. It's just how is it used, you know? Because rape's a tough thing to watch on screen. It's not really something you want to see. But I guess if it has like a reason for it, then maybe you could kind of justify it artistically. I don't know. I'm getting really, really off track on this. It was just kind of a point I wanted to make, but which maybe I should have saved for another video. I don't know. But I'll just move on. This was my number 3 pick, top 5 films of the 80s. Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull from 1980. Once Upon a Time in America, directed by Sergio Leone, 1983. Yes, another movie starring Robert De Niro. And when you think of mafia films, especially like American mafia films, the go-tos are Goodfellas and The Godfather. If you dig a little deeper, you'll probably pull out some other Scorsese films like Mean Streets, or Casino, stuff like that. You know, you'll talk about Scarface or Carlito's Way. But this, in my opinion, is the best mafia movie of all time. This is my personal favorite mafia film. You know, I mean, I'm a big fan of like Goodfellas, but I think for me this one kind of takes the cake. Once Upon a Time in America, Once Upon a Time in America, when we're talking about epics, it is pretty much as epic as like Fanny and Alexander. It's not as long as Fanny and Alexander. Once Upon a Time in America is 2 hours and 29 minutes. And that is 3 hours is 180 minutes. And then, so it's 3 hours and 49 minutes. So this movie is almost 4 hours long. And it tells this epic tale of these kids who get into like small time crime, who grow up to kind of build their own little like gangster empire, and you know, and you see them go from little kids all the way to not very old, but older adults. You know, probably in their late 50s, maybe 60 years old type age. And then of course in that you see America change over all that time. So, you know, this is one of those movies that uses kind of the birth of modern America as a backdrop to a gangster story. It's kind of like, you know, kind of something like Gangs of New York. I think this movie is a bit more well conceived than Gangs of New York and better pulled off. You know, I love Gangs of New York. It's a really good movie. Yeah, Once Upon a Time in America is what was it? What was I talking about? In some video. In one of my Oscar videos, I talked about No Country for Old Men and how that is about as close to perfect as any film has ever come. This is another one, I feel. It has amazing performances from an incredible cast. almost entirely men. There's not a lot of women in this movie. Jennifer Connelly, an early Jennifer Connelly, she's like 12 or something. She's in this. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of women. But you know, stars Robert De Niro, has James Woods. I'm looking here on the back, and Joe Pesci gets top billing, even though he's only in one scene. But hey, Joe Pesci is in the movie, which is really awesome. And who else is in it? Treat Williams is in it. Burt Young. Man, what's that guy's name? William Forsythe is in it. It has an amazing cast, and it's also from an incredible filmmaker, Sergio Leone. He's known for making epic films. He's one of the most ambitious filmmakers of all time. His films are rarely shorter than 3 hours, and they're always very, very entertaining. Probably his second greatest, in my opinion, next to this would be like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And this is such a beautiful movie, such a poetic movie. I mean, I talked a lot about violence in this video, and I've talked about violence before in other videos, and how it has to be used in such a way, otherwise it could kind of be seen as exploitation. And this movie is very, very poetic. Every single image in this movie is very, very poetic, because every frame is just so meticulously meticulously composed. Every sequence is perfectly crafted, and so it just builds a certain atmosphere, and everything that happens in this movie kind of fits into this mood. And whether you're watching like Robert De Niro, or not Robert De Niro, but Robert De Niro's like child character, watch like Jennifer Connelly do her like dance thing. Whether you're watching her do that, and it's kind of like this really sweet romantic kind of back and forth that they're having. Whether you're watching that or you're watching people shoot up a car with a Tommy gun, it's like all within this like mood that totally enraptures me when I see the movie, and it always has this poetic feel to it. It's very poetic, and it's just. Oh man, I can't even really explain what it's like to experience this movie. Because of its very, very long running length, I haven't seen this movie too many times. I've seen it about 3 or 4 times, but every single time it just gets better. It's never, I've never been like, oh yeah, I remember this scene. Okay, let's let this scene wrap up real quick so I get on to better things of the film. No, every single scene is just pitch perfect. Again, not a perfect film, but I feel this is about as close as we've ever come. So if you can get your hands on Once Upon a Time in America, it's a grossly overlooked film. It's a grossly overlooked mafia film. Whether you're into mafia movies or into De Niro movies or into Leone films, whatever way you enjoy movies, this is a movie that you are going to have to see, because it's going to fit into that category somehow. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about every single category people enjoy films in the past 2 seconds, but if someone gave me a list, I bet I could make it fit into every single thingy. So, yeah, Once Upon a Time in America, directed by Sergio Leone, 1983, one of the best films you will ever see in your life, one of my favorite movies of all time. Check this movie out, please do. Paris, Texas, directed by Wenders, 1984. My number one pick. This was kind of an easy one. Like I said before in my videos, there is no clear favorites. Like I don't, what was number 5 again? Do the Right Thing. I'm not trying to say Do the Right Thing isn't as good as Raging Bull or whatever. It's just kind of the order I chose to talk about the movies in. But every once in a while, I will say my favorites for last or whatever. This is my favorite of the whole decade. This is my clear favorite, and not just because of it's my clear favorite of the decade. It is quite possibly my clear favorite film of all time. In my underrated Scorsese films, I did a top 5 underrated Scorsese films. I mentioned that Bringing Out the Dead is a candidate for my favorite film of all time, and it is tied with Wim Wenders' Paris, Texas. Paris, Texas is a movie kind of like Once Upon a Time in America. It's a movie kind of about America. And it is a Western, yet it's directed by a German guy. but you know, it's still a very American film. You know, everything from obviously the setting, the landscapes you see. It's shot just like a western. It's using a lot of American actors, and I love the observation that Roger Ebert made in an essay he wrote on Paris, Texas, about how Travis, the main character, is not only the same name as the character from Taxi Driver, who also has the same name from the character of The Searchers, which are, you know, Searchers is a western, Taxi Driver is kind of a modern urban western, and this is kind of another western. They all have the same names, Travis, but also the guy who plays him, Harry Dean Stanton, the way he's dressed is in your kind of typical what you imagine an American to be wearing. You know, ball cap, blue jeans. You know, kind of like a white shirt, it's like red, white, and blue. You know, just the typical all-American kind of outfit. I guess the only thing that's missing is Harry Dean Stanton's is really, really skinny. When most people think of America, they kind of think of people who are overweight. You know, myself included. Yeah, Paris, Texas has an incredible story to it, and there's kind of like not halves, but maybe there's like 3/3 to the film. I think, you know, I guess you could call that the three acts. I haven't really dissected it that closely, but it stars Harry Dean Stanton in one of his only starring roles, and it is, I mean, everyone loves Harry Dean Stanton. He's a character actor. He's like in everything. This is one of the only times where he was actually like the main character, not just someone who's in the background or something. And he gives one of the greatest screen performances of all time. He starts out wandering America, just searching for something, and he's been searching for so long he's forgotten what he was searching for, but he knows he still has to search for it. So he is a searcher, right? Comes full circle, and he's kind of picked up out of the desert with what credentials are on him. They're able to find out, okay, he has a brother living in, you know, this other town. You know, we'll contact him. His brother's like, oh, I haven't heard from him in like 4 years. You know, he's been searching that long for over 4 years. You know, and he goes to find him and basically does what he can to try to bring him back to reality, because he won't speak. Travis is not speaking at all, and he's just kind of like dead. Just that's all he does. He tries to bring him back to reality, tries to get him to talk again, brings him back to his home. Says, hey, you know, remember my wife? You know, and it turns out that Travis's brother, played by the great Dean Stockwell, has Travis's kid, his real kid, and that's where a lot of the answers start to come from. Because at first it's just like you have no idea what's going on, like what's wrong with Travis, like how come he's been gone for so long, you know. And it turns out he had this kid with this young beautiful woman played by Natasha Kinski, and things didn't go so well because of Travis's insecurities and paranoia and jealousy, which we've talked about in Raging Bull. I guess I'm just attracted to films like that. I don't know why. So basically the rest of the movie turns into him bonding with his kid, and then him trying to reunite his kid with his mother. So they go on a trip across America to try to find this kid's mom. Just like Once Upon a Time in America, just like No Country for Old Men, this is about as close to perfect as any film has ever come. Everything about it, from the performances to how it's shot, how well it's made, to the acting, to the writing. It is just. I have a hard time finding any way it possibly could have been better. And the climax of the movie is really, really interesting. It's not like, you know, oh, we found the mom and, you know, we have to fight off like her douchebag boyfriend and reunite everyone, live happily ever after. I won't say too much about it, but he finds her at her job, and part of her job, it's a really unique job. It's not exactly like, you know, she's not like a stripper or a prostitute or anything, but part of her job is, I guess you could say, sexually related, and she basically will have phone calls with people, and she just like sits in a room, and then there's a piece of glass separating her from the customer. You know, she can't see him, but he can see her, and they pick up a phone and they talk with each other. And Travis picks up the phone and has this conversation with her without ever saying who he is, and the monologue that he gives to her, and then in this monologue she realizes who he is, that, oh, I haven't seen you in so many years and stuff, and the monologue she returns back is just the absolute pinnacle of writing and the absolute pinnacle of performance and minimalism, pinnacle just of everything that makes a great movie great. I think when I first saw this movie, I forgot to breathe watching this scene, because it was just so perfect and so powerful and just so emotional, but it was still very understated at the same time. And it's just when the movie was over, I just knew that I had seen one of the greatest movies that's ever going to be made. I don't care however long the art of film lasts, whether it's thousands of years or whether it's just a couple hundred more years. I don't care. I don't care what innovations come along. Paris, Texas is still going to reign as one of the all-time great films. Yes, I hope I didn't talk it up too much, but that's just how I personally feel about it. I have actually shown this movie to a couple people that weren't as enthusiastic about it as I was. They're like, "Oh yeah, it was really good," but I don't know. There's just something about it. When I saw the movie, it was like movies don't get better than this. Movies don't get better than Paris, Texas. They don't get better than Bringing Out the Dead, and they don't get better than, I could name a bunch of movies, But before I get too emotional, let me stop right there. This is my number one pick for my favorite film of the 80s. This is a candidate for my all-time favorite movie ever made. This is Wenders' Paris, Texas from 1984. All right. Oh, excuse me. Okay. So before I sign off, let me give you a rundown of the films I talked about. Just a quick little recap. There we go. So the first film was Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing from 1989. I don't own it, so I can't show you. The next film is Ingmar Bergman's Fanny and Alexander from 1982. The third film, Martin Scorsese's Raging Bull from 1980. Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America from, gosh, I forgot the date. Okay, from 1983. Dang, I don't know why I can't remember that. And then Wenders' Paris, Texas from 1984. So those were my picks of the 80s. Sorry if I offended anybody who insisted that Pretty in Pink is the best thing from the 80s. I don't mean to offend anybody. Not my personal favorite. But the 80s was a great decade. Like I said, it's a decade of nostalgia that everyone has, even people who didn't live through it. 80s song comes on the radio, whether it's Aha or Simple Minds. It's like, everyone's just got to stop and be like, yes, this is music right here. So I love the 80s, and I feel bad about the other movies I really wanted to talk about that I didn't get a chance to. But the 80s is a controversial decade when it comes to people's favorites of things. So what were your favorites? Let me know. Comment, tell me, say like, Brett, you're dumb, like this, this is the best movie of the 80s or something like that. Let me know your opinions on things, and let me know your opinions on how I'm doing my thing. I love you guys so very much, so I thank you for the continued support. I'll see you guys in another video.